now. So most foods nowadays come with nutritional labels, and what with the new President Obama's plan is they want to bring in nutritional labeling on all restaurant food as well, which will be great because then you'll actually know what you're eating and what you're ordering in restaurants. So that's going to be phased in over the next few years. But just to briefly review the nutritional labels, it's very important to read each component of the label. So first off, they have at the top there, you can see where it says start here, they have how many servings per container. And that's very important because if you just look at the calories and some of the nutrients in the product, you might think those numbers are representing the whole container. But often in this particular case, you can see that they're relating to one serving of the container, and the container actually has 2 servings. So in this case, it's 250 calories. And if you eat the whole container of whatever product it is, you're actually having 500 calories. So it's kind of if you're just in a rush and you're looking very quickly, it's really important to see how many servings per container so you're accurate when you're looking at how much you're eating. So calories, not that I suggest anybody counts calories, but it's important to know if it's a high caloric food that you're going to have limited amounts of it, or you're only going to have it once in a while versus every day. Because we know that for most of us in the room here, 1,600 to 2,000 calories is quite adequate for all of us. So if you're having that whole container, which is 500 calories, that's already a quarter, more than a quarter of what we need for our whole day. So you're going to sort of use judgment when selecting things. And some days that's just what you're going to have, and that's fine. But the thing is, in moderation, you don't want to be doing that every day. And the next is looking at fat, the saturated fat, the cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates, etc. And what's important when looking at the fat is we know that fats aren't always healthy for the body, particularly saturated fats. They cause hardening of the arteries, plaque buildup on the arteries, which leads to cardiovascular illness, heart attacks, strokes, that kind of thing. So that's why we want to limit particularly saturated fats in our diet. We do need some fats to metabolize vitamins and those sort of things, but we don't need a lot, and particularly saturated fats we don't need a lot of. We get fats in all kinds of things that we eat, our proteins, etc., that we don't need to put a lot of additional fat into our diet. Cholesterol, again, we want to keep it low for cardiovascular reasons. Sodium is another big health concern. We have far too much sodium in our diet, which leads to hypertension and ultimately cardiovascular illness. So again, we want to pay attention when selecting foods that these are in reasonable amounts. And you can see in the purple the daily values. So they base that on a 2,000 calorie a day diet essentially. And so they've broken down how many grams of fat, and at the bottom of the food labels you'll see what they've determined through research, what is adequate amount. So for example, total fat, they believe 65 grams of fat a day is adequate for a 2,000 calorie a day diet. So when we're looking at the total fat of being 12 grams, that's 18% of that 65 grams. So it's really important you look at that, because if the food choices you're making are really a large percentage of your fat that day, that's fine, but then maybe the other food choices for your other meals are going to be lower in fat, so that you're basically balancing it out, that you're trying to maintain that 65 grams of fat a day most days or less. So now, have nutritional labels been here for very long in the United States? Yeah, because we brought them into Canada just a few years ago. They were legislated in there, and it's made a significant difference because North America is trying to look at reducing obesity in our population, so they believe that this is instrumental in having people be more aware of what they're eating to make some, changes. And I'm going to show you some comparisons of food items in a minute. The other important thing is dietary fiber. They believe dietary fiber is important for the regulation of the digestive system, the bowels, as well as leads to a reduction in some types of cancer if you have a high fiber diet. Sugars, as you can see, there's no daily value for that, as they don't believe sugars are important to the diet, because you get a lot of sugars naturally in fruit, your fructose in your fruits, those sort of things. And basically sugars are empty calories. They don't have any nutritional value, and they're just additional calories. So the suggestion is you try not to put extra sugars into your diet that aren't necessary. And then again at the bottom in the blue, the vitamin A, C, calcium, etc. are vitamins, and again you can see the percentage. So that's just basically how to read a label. And this was at the bottom of it, just so in case you didn't see it, and not all labels always have it here at the bottom. But this is what they have determined for essentially a 2,000 calorie diet, as we need about 65 grams of fat and 20 grams of saturated fat, etc. I don't suggest you do calorie counting or, you know, counting the grams of fat you eat, because that's very tedious and it feels too much like a restrictive diet. And for any of us that have been on diets, that creates, you know, a psychological conflict if you have to start counting and restricting. But this is just to show you, give you an idea of some of the breakdown that the literature shows. What the other thing they've determined is, and there's lots of debate about this, because you're going to see diets that are really high in carbohydrates, some that are really high in protein, some of the sort of fringe diets have all sorts of variations. But what the researchers have determined, that probably in most of our diets, what's healthy is to have about 30% of our daily diet as fats, 15% proteins, and about 55% carbohydrates. And there's debate on that. Some people suggest we should have higher protein diet with a lower carbohydrate, and then there's some of the fringe diets that are really high fat. So there's a lot of debate back and forth on what is the healthiest combination of those foods to best meet our needs, but currently this is the suggested percentages. And what I use this for is if I know that for my regular day I shouldn't probably have more than 30% of fat in my daily calories, then what I do, because I refuse to count grams of fat and all that sort of stuff, when I'm looking at labels, when I'm making selections, like here for example, it's 250 calories, and as you can see directly across from there it says how many calories from fat, 110 calories. So I know that's about 45–50% of that food item is fat content. And I know I'm trying to keep my fat around 30% of my daily food, just to try to give me a ballpark, because I don't want to be counting calories and fat grams and all that stuff. So then I'll know, okay, this one's a little higher than my 30%, but I know for breakfast I'm having fruit and low-fat cereal, so I know it's probably going to balance out. But then again, I'm going to look at this and say, I don't want too many of my food choices to be greater than 30% fat. So I just use it as sort of a ballpark how to regulate what I eat a bit. Because I think that's what we have to do. We have to kind of pay attention to what's in our foods so we know. So here's a test for you. Which food here is lower in saturated fat? And these I added in so they're not as slick as the United Health slides.
One on the right, vegetable oil?
Vegetable oil. Everybody agree? So if you're looking at them, first off you'll see that the calories in the butter is lower than the vegetable oil. So if you were counting calories, this might be important to you. But when we're looking at nutrition, we should be looking at what's healthiest for our body. The calories are important because we know if we have more calories in than we burn, we're going to gain weight, and vice versa. But we want to look at our whole global health, our cardiovascular health in particular. So if you look at between butter and vegetable oil, yes, the butter has less calories, but the vegetable oil has less saturated fat, 2 grams versus 6, less cholesterol, like no cholesterol, which is very important, and look at the sodium difference as well. So sodium, cholesterol, and saturated fat are the main things we're trying to reduce in our diets. Then obviously the vegetable oil is going to be the better selection, even though it might have some more calories, but from a global perspective, it's better for our health. So that might be the choice you're making if you're choosing between those two particular products. Whole milk and skim milk, which is lower in saturated fat? Yeah, that one's a pretty easy one. But for some people, it's important that they have fat in their milk. But my suggestion would be, over time, to move towards skim milk. You do get used to it. Your taste buds do change. And in the beginning phases, it's difficult, because I went from 2% to skim milk over time. And now I find 2% too rich. So your body does adapt. And you can see the difference, because for women, most of us should be drinking 2 to 4 glasses of milk or milk products per day. And in whole milk, that's 150 calories with 5 grams of saturated fat. So if you're having, that's just 1 glass. If you're having 2, that's 300 calories plus 10 grams of fat, which is 50% of your daily requirements. And that's, that's a significant difference from the skim milk that has essentially no fat.